back to the deep dive. It's January 31st, 2026, and we are stepping right into the middle of, well, a political storm that's brewing across the UK.
It really is.
And if you've been anywhere near the news this week, there's this one phrase that just keeps popping up again and again. It almost sounds like a movie title. Everyone is talking about a British ICE.
It does have a cinematic ring to it, doesn't it? But, I mean, for anyone who might not have been glued to American news for the last decade, ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Right.
It's the U.S. agency that really became the face of, those zero-tolerance border policies, especially under Donald Trump.
Exactly. And the buzz right now isn't just about admiring that model from a distance. We're seeing major political figures, people like Kemi Badenoch for the Conservatives, key advisors for reform, actively pushing to import that exact model here. We're talking about a move toward a paramilitary-style agency for mass deportations.
And that's the real tension, isn't it? Because on one side, you have this huge political promise for a removals force. The numbers they're throwing around are just staggering, up to 150,000 people a year.
Wow.
But then on the other side, you look at the stack of research we have today, government reports, legal analyses, and there are just these massive hurdles in the way.
So our mission today is to get past the sound bites. We want to understand what a British ICE would actually, look like on the ground. Why do its supporters think it's the answer? And honestly, is it even possible?
Can you even do it? Yeah.
Can the UK actually pull this off without, breaking international law or crashing the economy in the process?
It's that classic clash between political rhetoric and, structural reality. That's really what this deep dive is all about.
Okay, so let's unpack the proposal itself first. Because when I was reading through the Conservative plan, specifically what Kemi Badenoch's putting forward, it's not just a tweak. This is a complete overhaul.
Oh, it's a fundamental shift. Badenoch's proposal is for a dedicated removals force, and they're putting serious money behind it, a $1.6 billion whirlwind budget.
And the goal?
The explicit goal is deporting 150,000 people annually. Just to give you some context, that is a scale of operation we just haven't seen in modern British history.
150,000 people. I mean, that's the population of a small city. How do they even propose to find and process that many people?
Well, that's where the tactics get pretty intense. We're not just talking about hiring more immigration officers. They're proposing the widespread use of facial recognition technology without warning.
Okay.
But the part that really changes the fabric of daily life is the police involvement. The proposal includes a requirement for police to conduct immigration checks on everyone they stop or arrest.
Wait, hang on. Let's pause on that.
Yeah.
So if I get pulled over for, a broken taillight, that interaction automatically becomes a border control check.
Effectively, yes. It turns every single police stop into a potential immigration audit. It sort of deputizes every constable as a border agent.
But surely that would just clog up the legal system. Our courts are already completely backlogged. If you're arresting thousands more people, where do they all go?
Well, that's the second part of the plan, and it's just as controversial. The proposal includes abolishing immigration tribunals.
Abolishing them? The whole system?
That's the pitch. Yeah. The idea is to have decisions made solely by the Home Office. Badenoch's argument is that lawyers are, and this is her word, coaching applicants to game the system.
Right.
So by removing the tribunals and denying legal aid, the claim is that you strip away all the delay tactics.
Although I'm guessing legal experts would probably argue that what they call delay tactics is what most of us just call due process.
Precisely. You're basically taking the independent judge out of the equation. It's a huge centralization of power in the Home Office.
And that's just the Conservative plan. When you look over at what Reform UK is proposing, they take it even further. We've got this document here about something called Operation Restoring Justice.
Yeah, and this is where you can see the American influence so clearly. The plan is being pushed by an advisor named James Orr. He's been described as a kind of British Sherpa to the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, so the link is very direct.
Okay.
Orr is calling for a new borders task force. But the legal framework they want to build around it is basically a scorched earth policy on international law.
How drastic are we talking?
Well, to make this British IC work without getting stuck in court, they are proposing to just disapply the 1951 Refugee Convention. They want to disapply the UN Convention Against Torture, and of course, leave the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR, entirely.
Disapplying the Convention Against Torture, I mean, that feels like a line that most Western democracies you don't cross that. That's a foundational post-war treaty.
It is absolutely outside the post-war international consensus. But the argument from reform, and you hear it from parts of the Conservative Party too, is that these treaties are just handcuffs. They look at the Trump administration in the U.S., and they see an ability to remove people within a week, as Chris Philp put it. They want that speed.
Right. They see the treaties as friction.
Exactly. And speaking of that U.S. inspiration, we have to talk about what that model actually looks like, because it isn't just paperwork. There's this report from Byline Times that highlights the paramilitary nature of ICE. It talks about a really awful incident involving a nurse, Alex Pretty.
Yeah, I saw that. What happened there?
Well, this was in Minneapolis, and it really shows the difference between a police force and a paramilitary force. Pretty was killed during a raid. He wasn't even the target. He stepped in to help a protester.
Right.
He was pinned down. Now, he was a licensed gun owner, but his weapon was holstered. Despite that, he was shot by the agents.
That's a very different picture from just checking passports. And the reaction to that over here was pretty telling, wasn't it?
It was. The report noted that even after that, you had reform counselors publicly praising the ICE model. So when proponents say they want a British ICE, they aren't just talking about admin changes. They're talking about a force with a much more aggressive physical presence, the uniforms, the raids, the visible show of force.
So that's the proposal. A paramilitary-style force. Mandatory police checks, no courts, ignore the treaties. It sounds like a fortress. Which brings us to the reality check. Can they actually do any of this?
And this is where the rubber meets the road. We've basically identified three massive walls this policy just runs headfirst into. You've got the legal wall, the economic wall, and the social wall.
Okay, let's start with the legal one.
Right. So we have this analysis from the Institute for Government, and it makes it very clear. You can't just disapply a treaty like you're unsubscribing from a newsletter.
It's not that simple.
Not at all. Leaving the ECHR, for example, has these huge knock-on effects. The Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland is underpinned by the ECHR. The entire peace process relies on it.
So if you scrap the ECHR to deport people faster, you risk blowing up the peace process in Northern Ireland.
You do. And not just that. Our trade deal with the EU is also linked to it. If the UK leaves the ECHR, parts of that trade deal could be suspended. You pull that one thread, and the whole thing starts to unravel. You're trading immigration control for a potential trade war and a constitutional crisis.
And even if they tried to ignore all that, the courts here wouldn't just go along with it, surely. We've got this concept of the living instrument.
Yes, the European Court treats the convention as a living instrument, meaning rights evolve. But let's just look at the actual data on appeals, because there's this myth that it's all foreign criminals using loopholes.
Right.
The data shows that between 2015 and 2024, there were 61,000 successful appeals based on ECHR rights. And the vast majority were based on Article 8, the right to family life, and Article 3, protection against torture.
So it's mostly just regular people saying, my kids are British, or if you send me back, I'll be killed.
Exactly. So if you abolish the tribunals or leave the ECHR, you are essentially saying the state no longer has to respect those family bonds. That is a very hard sell in a courtroom. The legal wall is high and it is thick.
Okay, so legally it's a minefield. But let's talk about the economics. This was a real eye-opener for me in the research. We sort of assume that because the U.S. can force countries to take deportees back, we can too.
Yeah.
But this Pimlico Journal piece points out a huge gap in our muscle.
This is fascinating, and it's something almost no one talks about.
Yeah.
The U.S. strategy for deportation relies on leverage, pure economic leverage.
How does that work?
When they want a country like Mexico to take back, say, 20,000 people, they don't just ask nicely. They threaten to cut off remittances.
The money that workers in the U.S. send home to their families.
Correct. And it is a huge amount of money. The U.S. sends about $103 billion in remittances every year. For some of those countries, that money is a significant chunk of their entire GDP. So if the U.S. president says, take these people back or we block Western Union, those governments have to listen. It's a financial gun to the head.
And the UK? Do we have that kind of leverage?
The UK sends about $9.3 billion globally.
Oh, that's not the same at all.
It's pocket change in comparison. The Pimlico Journal analysis is brutal on this. The UK simply lacks the economic bullying power.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, take India. The government always talks about returning Indian nationals, but India is an economic superpower now. If the UK says, take these 50,000 people back or else, India can just say, or else what? We can't afford a trade war with India. We need them more than they need our remittances.
That's such a crucial point. We're trying to copy a strategy that requires being a superpower, which in isolation we just aren't anymore.
Precisely. The U.S. can act alone because it's an economic giant. The UK, post-Brexit, is a middle power trying to use superpower tactics. It just doesn't work.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little. We're talking about these British IC proposals as if they're future plans. But
Yeah.
looking at the latest government stats from this month, it kind of feels like we're already halfway there.
That's a very fair point. If you look at the gov.uk figures we've got, enforcement is already at historic highs. The political narrative is that we've lost control. But since July 2024, raids are up 77%.
Yeah.
Arrests are up 83%.
Those are huge jumps. And who are they targeting? Because the rhetoric is always about criminal gangs and smugglers.
The targets listed are, well, they're not primarily criminal safe houses. They're hitting dodgy businesses, nail bars, car washes, barbers, takeaways. They conducted over 17,000 raids on these kinds of places.
That feels less like hunting down international crime syndicates and more like
Yeah.
harassing the high street.
It's a crackdown on the gray economy, absolutely. And they're using new tech to do it. Immigration officers have body-worn cameras now. There's a mandatory rollout of digital IDs. So while the politicians are arguing about the idea of a British IC, the actual machinery of surveillance and enforcement is already being built. The cameras are on.
And the media plays a huge role in how we all see this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We have this analysis from iClaim that looks at the narrative.
Yes, and this is so important for listeners to be aware of. The study found that both right-wing and actually left-wing media tend to reinforce this simple dichotomy: legality versus illegality.
How does the left-wing press do that?
Often inadvertently. The framing blurs the line between asylum seekers who have a legal right to ask for protection and illegal migrants by lumping them together, or by focusing so much on the illegality of how they arrived, like the small boats. It creates this moral categorization.
Right. So if you frame someone as illegal from the start, anything that happens to them after that seems more justifiable.
Exactly. It primes the public to accept that enforcement is the only logical response and that it should override human rights concerns. It prepares the ground for a British IC model to seem reasonable.
So the language matters.
Yeah.
It really does prepare the battlefield. But I want to talk about the cost of all this. Not the financial cost, but the human one. We've got a study here from the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, on the mental health impact of the hostile environment.
Yeah, this is a pretty sobering read. The hostile environment wasn't just a policy name, it had real clinical effects. The study found significant increases in psychological distress, specifically in Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities, while these policies were being rolled out.
And why those groups in particular?
It comes down to what the researchers call the deputization of border control. The policy forced landlords, doctors, employers to act as border guards. They had to check papers, or they'd face massive fines.
So if you're a landlord and you're terrified of a 10,000-pound fine, you might start checking some people more thoroughly than others.
Exactly. It leads directly to racial profiling. If you look at Pakistani or Bangladeshi, even if you're a British citizen born here, you suddenly face barriers to renting a flat or seeing a doctor that a white British person doesn't. You're constantly having to prove that you belong here.
That turns society against itself. Your doctor becomes a border agent.
And that's the real social cost. It gets into everyday life. It's not just about a raid at dawn. It's about that low-level stress and suspicion that creates a measurable mental health crisis.
But there is pushback to this, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. There's a robust civil society response. We see things like the anti-raids movement, where neighbors literally come out to stop the vans. But there's also this strong counter-narrative emerging that challenges the whole economic argument.
Alice.
Well, the government says undocumented workers undercut the economy. But civil society groups argue that these workers are actually at the heart of the economy.
The cleaners, the delivery drivers, construction workers.
The people who kept the country running during the pandemic a lot of the time. The argument is that they aren't a drain on resources. They're essential labor that the economy relies on but refuses to recognize legally. If you actually deported 150,000 of them a year, you'd see huge labor shortages in care, hospitality, construction.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We started with the buzzword. British ICE, we've got politicians promising this paramilitary force that can deport 150,000 people a year, no courts, no treaties.
But when we looked closer, we found these three massive walls. The legal wall, where leaving the ECHR threatens peace in Northern Ireland and trade with Europe.
The economic wall, where we just don't have the financial muscle to force other countries to take people back.
And the social wall, the immense damage to community cohesion and mental health.
It seems like the political promise is writing checks that the geopolitical reality just can't cash. The rhetoric is American superpower, but the reality is British middle power.
That's a great way to put it. This desire for absolute sovereignty and control is hitting the hard reality of an interconnected world. You can't be an island fortress and a global trading partner at the same time. Not easily.
Which brings us to a final thought for you listening. There's this fascinating point in the Pimlico Journal. If Britain lacks the solitary power of the U.S. to enforce its borders alone, if we can't be the bully, what's the alternative?
It raises a really provocative question, doesn't it? Is the only way to get the security that these politicians are promising actually more cooperation with Europe?
Fortress Europe.
Exactly. If we can't do it alone, do we have to pool our sovereignty with the EU to protect the external borders? Are we moving to a world where sovereignty is traded for security?
And that's the great irony, isn't it? To get the kind of border control the Brexiteers always wanted, we might have to hug Europe tighter than ever.
Trading sovereignty for security, it's the dilemma of the decade.
Something to think about. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.